Like off the cuff.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us on this somber occasion on Israel's Yom Hazikaron. My name is Roei. I am the founder and executive director of ANU and apparently now a podcast host. And I am here with Shoshanna, our incredible board member, and with Alana, one of our very dedicated slate members. And I will give them a moment to introduce themselves. Hi, Shosh.
Alana. Oh, me. Okay. Hi, I'm Shoshana. I'm on the board of directors for ANU.
I'm Alana. I'm an advocate. If you don't know me, you should. I've got into advocacy because my family was taken hostage, and I still have family held hostage right now.
And you should follow them both on Instagram. They are prolific and some of the most important voices in our community at this moment. So we're going to start today with a deep breath because it is a very painful day. I spent a lot of my morning reading through Yehuda Amichai and a book collection called Shiva, Poems of October 7th, which is poems that were written in the days after October 7th and really dealing with the fallout of that day. And then, for those who don't know, my dad's best friend in the army was killed. He was one of the first casualties of the First Lebanon War. Tuli, there's a famous children's song about him, Tulik, about with his blue eyes. But he was killed in the Beirut airport in 1982 while running um, while running to try to save his friends from a burning APC, and he was shot and killed. Um, One of Israel's finest, and like many of the stories of today, something that even now, 43 years later, is a painful loss to his family and to everyone who knew him. And sadly for us today, we are marking Yom Hazikaron 2025 with 319 soldiers who were killed in the past year, 79 civilians killed since the last Memorial Day, incalculable losses to their family, to Israel, and to the Jewish people. And we want to take this moment to honor their sacrifice and celebrate their contributions.
Um, I also think it's important. There are a few specific losses that I think, from my perspective, that I want to call out. One, I want to call out the hostages who could have been saved, who were killed. Um, like the Beautiful Six, including Hersh Goldberg, Poland. Um, they could have been saved, but they weren't because of our military pressure that led to Hamas executing them. And so I'm thinking about them a lot today. They're not the only ones who could have been saved but died there, but they are a really specific example of that I don't think I will ever personally get over. And I also want to highlight Omer Nutra. Omer Nutra, who last Yom HaZikaron we thought was alive. We later last year discovered that he was killed on October 7th. For me, it's really personal because Omer is an American. He's from Long Island, not far from, I mean, I grew up in New Jersey. I live in New York. His parents are some of the first people I met the first week after October 7th when I began my advocacy, and I've spent a lot of time with his brother and his cousin. And also, Omer was killed while he was trying to protect my family's kibbutz. His tank was not working, and they were not well staffed, and they were not supported to fend off that type of attack. But that's all his base was. His base was not offensive. It was a defensive base, and he was the, commander of that base, and his job was to protect my family's kibbutz Nil Oz. So I um I know he tried his best, and he fell trying to protect them, and I will be forever grateful to him and also to all of the incredible work that his family has done and continues to do to bring back the hostages.
Yeah, I very much echo that. I have been to Nero's twice now and spoken to the families. It's It's a sight of such sadness at this point. I've been there. I was there before October 7th, and it was such a beautiful place. And it's so painful that that's what's become of what used to be as an incredible journalist, Amir Tibon said, it was one of these places. It was 95% heaven and 5% hell, and then on that day the balance really flipped, and
True.
it's something we'll think about. Alana, to your point, there's now extensive reporting that 41 hostages were killed directly because of IDF pressure.
Yep.
That's as we talk about being the slate of discourse, a difficult conversation, right? Like here is Yom Hazikaron, where we celebrate the heroic sacrifices of so many IDF soldiers who had died, and yet also have to hold the space to know that 41 hostages were killed because of IDF action. And as the child of multiple generations of IDF vets, where my parents met in the military, my grandpa was in the Jewish brigade. I understand the difficult choices that soldiers make, but at the end of the day, they are led by a political echelon.
Yes.
And so the ultimate responsibility lies with them, which they have yet to take. And I do hope that the people, the citizens of Israel, when there is a next election, if it is free, hold them accountable for their lack of responsibility and their refusal to take responsibility in the 571 days
71.
since. So today we were also treated to a vintage performance by Sarah Netanyahu, the wife of the Israeli prime minister, another person who has yet to take accountability.
She's so much more than a wife. She is. Everyone knows it.
So
My
many
mom
things to
says
say.
she's in his ear every day.
She's
And
like the Elon Musk of Israel.
And she literally was today, right? And he was giving a press conference talking about how there are at least 24 hostages still alive, and you can literally see her on video saying "pachot,"
Yeah.
less. And what a horrific thing to do on Yom HaZikaron to the families who are still holding hope that their loved ones are alive. And I want to turn this over to you, Alana, because this is a statement, an insensitive statement that directly impacts you and your family.
I mean, yeah, it's horrendous. I mean, one, the idea that she would share knowledge that none of us know, not publicly, not hostage families. We don't know the exact number. They don't tell us these things. I mean, we do know when we have signs of life from our own family members, but it's jarring. It's really jarring. It's insensitive. It is so flippant to be able to talk about, also just to talk about the hostages in the terms of numbers like that. These are human beings. These are lives that we are all fighting for. And to just casually release such information publicly is truly disturbing to me. And it's terrifying. The way that we live and the way that, my family lives is, and what I say is in like an unbearable state between hope and horror. And anything can turn it into horror. Any day we can receive news that would be our worst fears. Not that what's happening right now isn't already a worst fear, but in my family, we've had signs of life from David, but we don't have intel to my knowledge, and we haven't had signs of life from Ariel, and we don't know what this means. What does this mean? We assume he's part of the 24, which is already less than half of the total who are there. So I know I saw Matan Zankanker's mother, Inav, go publicly and say that she now deserves information about her son. that if Sarah is going to say this, well, now we deserve clear information about the status of our loved ones. Um, so yeah, I don't think that something like this should be taken lightly.
Thank you for sharing and touching on this really painful topic. And I think that what you talked about, the idea that people are flippantly and casually using the pain of 59 families, and even more than that, right? Because this is Israel, and we know, as Yehuda Amichai said, that the diameter of the bomb is a lot more than its immediate impact zone,
Yeah.
right? So it's much more than 59 families. So many people are affected, and I think that I want to bring this. Hi, Otto. I want to
Computer. And
I want to bring this back, I think, from Israel to our side of the pond, and something that we saw today on Yom Hazikaron of all days is that some of the slates running in the World Zionist Congress are having hostage family members speaking to get out the vote efforts, because they are promising that if you vote for this slate or that slate, that they will be the ones that bring the hostages home, which is such a wild promise given that there is nothing the World Zionist Congress, the World
yeah,
Zionist Organization, any of the four national institutions can do to pressure Israel's political echelon
nothing.
to bring its people home.
Let alone not in October. We need them to come home now. So what?
That's
We're gonna wait till the World Zionist Congress in October? I forgot about that part.
I did. It's been a long day, but yes, that's a good point. What a wild promise! Like, yeah, we will vote for us, and in 6, 7 months, we will do something about it. Um, it's
There's a reason I
so
haven't said anything about the hostages in regards to this because there's no connection.
right. I'm. th- There's only one connection I can think of, and it's incredibly depressing, which is that the Jewish Agency for Israel has a victim of terror fund. And so the one thing that the national institutions can do is
Yeah,
provide financial relief once it's confirmed that the
mhm,
hostage is dead.
right.
That's the only thing the national institutions can do. And so it's
Mhm.
wildly irresponsible to use your family and so many other families' pain to get out the vote. It's cynical and
It's just not true.
not true. It's outside the scope, but I think, again, given what you just shared about Sarah Netanyahu being insensitive, I mean, these are fellow American Jews. Um, and
Yeah, I don't really understand it.
I don't understand, but I wanted to make sure that you had a space to say anything you want to them, right?
Yeah,
This is
I just think like people should know that there's absolutely nothing that the World Zionist Congress can do to get the hostages home. Sure, like I'm sure there is some sort of way about perhaps if God forbid we're still in this situation in October of trying to funnel money towards supporting, let's say, the Hostage Family Forum is maybe one example. But none of that will directly lead to them coming home, and we shouldn't be waiting that long. So it's just like it should be like a non-issue in terms of a platform to get out the vote on.
uh, and to your point, we've been saying it for 571 days, but it isn't bring them home in October.
Yeah.
It's bring them home now, because every day, I mean, I think, well, I know all three of us have heard, but I imagine at this point, most Jews around the world have heard the testimonies of the people who came back and what they have had to go through and the horrific conditions, specifically the men and women, but like the men who are still there, right? Still there. And they were, as far as Hamas thinks of it, combatants.
Correct. David, my cousin, is 34. He'll be 35 in a few weeks in May. That will be his second birthday in captivity. They he's a father. He's a civilian who was taken from the kibbutz. He is not a combatant, but he is of fighting age, so they consider him to be that. I know he's been kept in the dark with no light and no air in the tunnels, often alone. He apparently, the intel we have is he's spent a lot of time by himself. There were times where he definitely very little to no food, and there have been times where he had no water. And there are other hostages who have not only had that similar experience, but are also chained, chained, and they spend every single day in chains. So it is like the way that Hamas is treating them is, um, I mean, you're not supposed to treat anyone this way, soldier or otherwise, but they treat them as if they're soldiers and they treat them inhumanely. And I don't think that we have to convince anyone of that. We shouldn't have to, at least not Jewish people. We shouldn't have to convince.
I don't think anyone listening to this podcast needs to be convinced.
Yeah,
They do need to be reminded that
correct.
in no way should we be cynically exploiting the pains of these families to make
Mhm.
promises that we can't keep as a community.
Yeah.
They're already suffering enough without setting them up for
Mhm.
failed expectations. It's been 571 days of
Mhm.
pain. We should not be adding to that burden. I want to take us to something that I know both of you have a lot to say on, which is the events of the past week during Ben Gvir's visit and the radicalization of a movement that many of us have, that has had a positive impact on so many people's lives across the world, which is Chabad. I'm going to hand this over to you two because I know how passionate you are about this.
And I,
I think something that, I mean, this needs to be managed within Chabad internally. And I think maybe as a community, as a Jewish community, we can be asking Chabad to hold itself accountable, which is that there is this extremist faction within Chabad. They know it. They tolerate it to a certain extent because they don't like airing their own dirty laundry. And they are just, it's the messianists who feel that Mashiach is here now already, right? When the Rebbe died, they couldn't handle it. And they've become extremely radicalized in 2005 and then again post October 7th. And they are now just becoming an even stronger cult. And I think, there are many leaders within Chabad who are saying that what happened last week doesn't reflect upon their values. And many of us know that because we've dealt with Chabad in very positive ways. But if they aren't going to start holding these aspects of their community accountable, then, we as a community, as a greater community, are going to have to call it out.
maybe we should like, for anyone who may not know, take a step back and talk about what did happen, which was the 770 Chabad here in Crown Heights, which is just not far away from where I live here in Brooklyn. I live in Bed-Stuy, so I'm very close to Crown Heights. Um, they hosted Ben Gvir, and naturally, a pro-Palestinian protest, like planned to protest outside. Which, right, like I'm not going to pretend like that protest was a peaceful one. And like, but nonetheless, this is allowed under the law in America. And I'm sure in some way it was insightful, but I don't know. But that's irrelevant because what ensued was an enormous mob of Chabadniks, I guess, um, who isolated one woman. Like, besides, like, they found one woman who wasn't even part of the protest. She was a neighbor who was coming outside to see what was going on. And they harassed her and they chased her by herself. They surrounded her and they kicked her in the back and they were screaming in Hebrew, death to Arabs. And this is not just harassment. I mean, that speech in the context of what they were doing to this woman could easily be seen as incitement and not protected under free speech in this country because it did present imminent danger to her. So, I mean, this was one of the most shameful and disgusting displays of hatred that I've ever seen from the Jewish people. I've seen plenty of it from the other side, but from the Jewish people, and it should be condemned. Like from every Chabad in the world should condemn it and should take it seriously and weed it out of their community.
No, absolutely. And I think that I've seen a number of quotes from various leaders at different Chabads, and they there's this thing, and I understand it to an extent, which is that they're afraid to call out their community too harshly because then they feel like it excuses the pro-Palestinian activists that were there. And I think they're afraid that if they call it out, the community is going to be like, whoa, so it's okay for pro-Palestinian activists to come and to say all kinds of anti-Semitic things. But like, we are nuanced people. Like, we can say
Yeah.
this, it's not okay to chase a woman through the streets and throw things at her and threaten her life or threaten sexual violence upon her, or like, I
Yeah.
don't I don't understand why that's a complicated or controversial thing to just come outright and say.
Yeah. They also like punched a woman in the face and she was bleeding like really
Right.
badly. Turned because she was wearing a keffiyeh. She was part of the protest. Turns out the woman is Jewish and holds an Israeli passport.
Oh, wow.
She's super anti-Zionist though.
Mm.
But I'm saying though in the sense that she does not represent even, I would not say she doesn't even represent some of the most leftist Israelis. I don't think she is. I think she says she holds an Israeli passport, whatever that means. Um, and I think she's as far on the anti-Zionist spectrum as you can go within the Jewish community. But nonetheless, in what world does that does that is a violent reaction to that okay? It's
Right.
not. And I don't, what kind of scripture are they reading in Chabad? Don't they have some scripture to tell them how to tackle this?
Right. But apparently,
Aren't they studying all day?
right. No, but apparently, as I've been reading more about this, is that these like roving gangs of like basically late teens to early 20s, they're just kind of like yeshiva dropouts who have nothing to do during the day, and they're like one of 10 kids in their family, so no one's really looking after them. And they go around Kingston Avenue and they'll like harass Jews and non-Jews alike. Like
Yeah.
if they see a non-Jewish woman, I mean, if they see a Jewish woman who's not dressed modestly, like they'll harass her. And it's become such a thing that neighboring businesses are like, you need to do something about these kids because they're obnoxious. And so Chabad knows that this is a problem. And like, okay, it doesn't represent the majority, but you need to do something about it.
Yeah. Like if
So,
they don't want to be in yeshiva, let them do something else. Find
right,
like where are the programming,
right.
the programs to help them like do other, I don't know, put them in community service, like find ways to engage them because I mean, you know what? Studying all day, studying Torah all day is just not going to be for everyone. And
Right.
have an oppressive system that enforces that upon your young boys. And then when they don't want to decide to do nothing with them,
Mhm.
they need to have their energy put somewhere. And I'm sure there are better places for them to, you know, put their energy.
Right.
You would think.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
sadly, given
Yeah.
the extremism rising both in Israel and the American Jewish community, right? That's something we have to be honest about and address. For those who don't read the Israeli press, this weekend, Yediot, which is a mainstream newspaper, put out a very, very disturbing interview with Kobe Peretz, who I'm sure any of you who has been to, a bar mitzvah or a Jewish party at a FIDF or whatnot, has heard his songs and know his songs. And he was very adamant that one, Kahane was right, and two, that anybody who stops him from singing Death to Arabs, or sorry, Sheisaref Lachem Akfar, which is may your village burn. Like he said this to a commander of an IDF base who came to him and said, look, we're so happy you're here. Thank you for volunteering. You are not singing an incitement song against the Arabs on my base. And he called him a dirty kaplanist, right? And was essentially saying, if you are against me inciting against 21% of Israeli citizens,
Yeah.
then you are, and actually he called him, he was like, you are the same as Hamas, an
Yeah.
IDF commander.
I love that for us.
No.
At least
So
it's a good one.
yeah,
Yeah.
right, that is a good one. Like,
It's a good one.
of course, the IDF commander who is risking life and limb to protect the state of Israel and to protect all of its citizens, which is the oath he took,
Correct.
is a dirty traitor, Kaplanist, Hamasnik for...
An extension, though, of like the political divides and populism that we're not just seeing in Israel, like, right, where we're seeing it in Europe. It's obviously very much here in America, where people have relegated to political factions that have become like political tribes, where you see them, someone who is not part of your political tribe, as literally your enemy, even if it's in your own nation.
And there's no question that we're seeing that in the American Jewish community, where the division is quite stark, and where there is, dare I say, an army of influencers who are trying to normalize Kahanism and who are making the arguments that Kahana was right. Arguments that in Israel are illegal, and that in the United States also illegal. So it doesn't matter which foot you have in which Jewish community. The JDL, Kach, both illegal movements, designated terror groups.
Yes.
And yet we have very well-paid influencers who are coming to mainstream Jewish organization, like communal events, talking about this. They would never do it from the stage at an FIDF or at a federation, right? But they are doing it from their very large social media platforms that get a lot of engagement and that are swaying minds.
Correct. And they're claiming to represent Israel because they emblazon themselves, despite Israel not being a country they belong to or a country where they have to send their children to war. They sacrifice absolutely nothing for Israel, nothing. And they think that they sacrifice everything by talking about it because somehow that is the great sacrifice. But no, and they emblazon their bodies with the Israeli flag as if it's their own country and then claim to represent us. And they're not representing us because, like you said, in Israel, you can't support Kahanism.
And even more than that, I think it's so interesting because we're dealing with this in the American Jewish community, right? We're talking about bring them home, right? Bring them home now. But in America, that means, bomb, 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 Hamas.
Well, for some people, it's obviously not what it means,
That's
but
true. Not for us.
it's how it's very much become, much to my chagrin, art is in the eye of the beholder type of phrase. It's a bit ambiguous, and they allow it to be, even though I always tell people on October 11th, I printed out like a poster of my family, of my 6 family members, to go to like a UJA rally. And I went into like a printer shop in Williamsburg, Brooklyn, and I sat there crying and asking the guy to help me make the poster and print it out for me because I couldn't do it myself. It was too overwhelming for me. And he asked me, like, what do you want it to say? Because I had the pictures. I didn't know what I wanted it to say. And this is before there was any Bring Them Home campaign. It didn't exist. It was October 11th. And I said, bring our family back. Like, that's always what I was saying. And it came out naturally to me, but I never meant it as, like, to me, it never translated to violence, to bombs, to war. It translated to what I knew from the past, which were things like prisoner exchanges, diplomacy. But my most natural reaction was to point to the leaders in power, to the Israeli government. That's like, you don't say, bring my family back to Hamas, which is what, like, a lot of the rhetoric from these extremist influencers turned into. Or like Qatar or whatever. But no, it was like really the most natural thing for me to say is to just bring them back to me.
And I think again, the divide in our two communities is so interesting because what we know from consistent polling of Israelis is 80 to 90% would stop the war tomorrow if it meant bringing the hostages home.
Right.
A consistent polling over months. It's not
Yeah.
like a little blip here or blip there.
Yeah.
The one thing that unites Israelis at this moment is bringing the hostages home. But if you advocate for stopping the war to bring the hostages home in the American Jewish community, you're not one of us.
It's
Yeah.
crazy.
You're letting Hamas win, I think, is my favorite. And it's tough because I think it is a byproduct of this extremism, of this need for revenge that many people, and oddly enough, people, right, the people least affected directly by October 7th feel the greatest need for revenge.
Yeah. And look, the extremism and the extreme divide, not just, look, the right wingers take up way too much airtime and they shape too much of the narrative. But I will say also some of the very far left Jews who don't advocate enough for the hostages, like, and I don't mean Israelis, Israeli like peace advocates, like Israeli peace advocates get it and they incorporate both. But you're kind of, if not now, who I respect, and some people don't like that, but I respect generally. Like I can tolerate them. Whereas JVP, I don't feel so much that way about. But they also don't advocate for the hostages well enough. And so for me, as an American trying to advocate for my family, these separate factions at both ends have drowned me out, have made it harder for our message as hostage families to be very crystal clear, which is stop the war and bring them home simultaneously, which is what it's been for pretty much. I mean, it hasn't been that. I've been saying that for a year now. Not everyone has, but eventually they followed through on that a few months later. And that's our message. And it's been really hard for us to advocate and be heard because of these extremists, and especially because of the right wing extremists who have taken our cause and made it what they want it to be, which is not what it actually is.
It's an issue that we will have to solve. I don't think we're going to do it here, but to your point, right? We have to create a podcast because so much of the media sphere of the American Jewish community is not receptive to this messaging and does not platform these voices as often or as willingly as they should. And we at ANU believe deeply that this is for us to have a future, we need to be able to handle the complexity of voices, the at times discordant symphony of American Jewish opinion. And I think to that, if we're thinking about voices, we have to mention, sadly, the new reporting about the fraud in the World Zionist Congress, right? Because this election, which very sadly so few Jews vote in, despite the immense amount of money that has been spent to educate American Jews and to explain to them, this is your Jewish civic duty, right? You all go to vote. In November, you went to vote. So many of you went to vote in November, but in 5785, we had two major elections. And the first was our American election because we are American Jews, and the second was the World Zionist Congress election because we are Jewish. And we are on track for a record-breaking turnout. That is true.
Yeah.
But that's taking us up from 2% to just under 4%.
It's crazy.
So record-breaking and pathetic. But the saddest part of that is that you then have to subtract the horrifying amount of fraud. Well, the new reporting has it at 10,000 votes. So if we are on track to 200,000 votes, more than 5%. And
Allegations of, like, how do we know what the fraud consisted of? Like buying votes and stuff?
so all sorts. We don't have confirmation. We have leaks to the media.
Okay.
But what we know from the newest Times of Israel report, so E-Jewish Philanthropy has done a lot of work on this, but Times of Israel, do not know who their source is, but they said that somebody approached one of the slates, told them they were already doing this for other slates, and that for $50 a vote, they can have as many votes as they want. $50 a vote. Now, if 10,000 votes have been stolen, that's $500,000.
This is why people don't vote online in other elections. That's why you have to go in person to vote in America, I guess, in every other country.
Yeah, but $500,000 to sway this election. And
$500,000.
$500,000. And the Gilui Naot here is, I can tell you for sure, as the person in charge of the ANU bank account, that was not us. We don't have that kind of money. We don't have a percent. We have a single percent.
It's not liberal money.
It is most definitely
Conservative money.
And to tie it back to extremism, right? Like, we don't know who it is, right?
We don't, but we know it's on the right.
but the leaks and the sources point the finger.
My gut is the source. Okay.
Listen, the Jewish gut has been very accurate over the years. And we're not casting aspersions, but the sources point towards the hard right, more orthodox and such parties, which is sad, because to tie back to the Chabad, like, the three of us are not visible ambassadors of Judaism, if I can say that. Not to be offensive, but I'm not wearing a shtreimel.
Like, just walking around in the world.
Yeah, I'm not wearing a shtreimel. I'm not wearing a kippah. I am not that ambassador, the visible ambassador. I'm also not the visible, though I have, like all of us have dealt with anti-Semitism, because, I still look like this. And my name is Roei Eisenberg, so it's not hard. But to know that the most visible of Jewish ambassadors are the ones probably, allegedly, we're in America, I don't want to get sued, allegedly at fault for the fraud, there's something really painful about that at this moment, right? Like, anti-Semitism is rising, and we know, right? ANU believes that democracy is the greatest antidote to anti-Semitism. And so
easier for them to get votes, given their communities are so tight-knit and so aware of the election, and like it's different. I feel like they have more of like a network to easily get votes. But
they're in the middle of a civil war, because the Rav Landau, the great Rav Landau in Israel, told them that if you are truly ultra-Orthodox, if you are truly Haredi, then you cannot participate in a Zionist organization. I mean, this was amazing. I don't know if this was reported in English.
Because the anti-Zionist Haredim.
But I don't know if this was reported in English, but Merkaz is currently at the center of a big controversy, because they put up flyers with the Rav Landau's words in Mea Shearim and in the 5 towns, and basically telling them, hey, the Rav Landau told you not to vote. And now
like doing a counter campaign to be like, don't vote, don't vote, don't vote.
Yeah, but what's amazing is, so in suing them, they are making the case that Merkaz is trying to pretend that Eretz HaKodesh is bringing Zionism into the Haredi community, which is, wait, this is the World Zionist Congress. What do you mean you are offended that you are being accused of bringing Zionism into a Jewish community? I mean, you have to take a deep breath, because it's too much.
It really is.
But that's the extremism we're dealing with. And so, right, it's so layered. It's like the Slayer cake, and it's just horrific all the way down.
Unity, I think, really challenges the binaries that people understand about politics and about Zionism even. Because there are anti-Zionist right-wingers, religious ones.
Yeah.
Like, we know this. We know this. Other people don't know this.
Oh, we all about the horseshoe theory over here.
It's a circle. No. Wait, there's no horseshoe. It's a circle.
Look, we can't talk about it yet, but I think after the election, things will come out that, there's this saying about, politics makes for strange bedfellows. When we are allowed to talk about it, I have so much to say about the strange bedfellows of this election, because people who should never be working together, and I don't mean this I love coalition building, right? ANU is a big tent, we have people who very vehemently disagree within our tent. There's a difference between like building coalitions and like working hand in hand with somebody who completely opposes what you believe in, right?
Yeah.
Anu is a big tent around a tent pole of shared values. But if,
Yeah.
say, you are a, like us, a slate that believes that there should be an eventual two-state solution, and you found out that we were coordinating behind the scenes with a slate that only uses the words Judea and Samaria and doesn't believe Palestinians should have human rights or civil rights, that would be undermining the voters' trust in what we stand for.
Yeah.
And I'm telling you, after the election, I'm so excited for this tea to come out. Uh, 'cause-
The thing is, some of it is so ridiculous that I feel like people aren't going to believe it.
I still don't believe it, and I'm in the meetings. Uh,
Believe anything these days. No, that's not true. I'm good at
uh,
anything, but when it comes to this, I'll believe it.
but I think, what we can tell you, right, as three members of the Anu slate, is that Anu is here for the voters, and we are standing up. We have Shoshanna here, the chief complaint officer of Anu, who has filed more ethics complaints and election complaints against other slates than I think the history of the World Kindness Congress elections. I hope that you get a record, and I hope the AZM gives you a plaque for your incredible dedication and duty to the Jewish people here, and to saving and safeguarding the integrity of our election, because I think you're single-handedly doing it. Um, but really, like, we are here for you, and we, unlike many of the other slates, respect the voter, and we respect your intelligence, and we respect what you believe in when you are one of the 4% of American Jews who is actually voting. We want your voice to count. We want your vote to count. And many people have heard me say this. Even if you do not vote for us, I still think that your vote matters and that it should count and it should not be diluted by fraudulent votes. So please vote for us, number 6, ZionistElection.org, because we need a seat at the table for crafting the election rules. We were not invited this time.
Right. Oh yeah, we can influence the next one.
If, it's like in Israel, if there is another free election, we would
Yeah.
love.
If we
Right?
get,
Because
we still have in Israel.
but if the people the way you get a seat around this table that makes the rules is you have to win. And if only the people who win are those who committed fraud, then the next election will definitely not be free and fair. So vote for Anu.
It's called corruption.
Yeah.
So
One, because we wouldn't commit corruption, and two, one thing I can promise you this: we did not commit corruption because we don't have the money to commit corruption. We wouldn't do it anyways. We are the party of ethical behavior and integrity,
right.
but
We have no money.
we are the party of
Good. No money is influencing us because no one's giving it to us.
no one's giving us any money. The only money we have in our bank account, I put in there myself, and it's not that much. And it's going to pay for this podcasting platform. That's what we have, and no website. But really, we are here for the voter, and we're here for having these difficult conversations, and I think that's where we want to transition as we're winding down this episode. Is that I grew up in Israel, and for Israelis, these 2 days, which people don't know, but they used to actually not be back to back, like historically. There was space between them, and then there was a decision taken to put them together, and it's the explanation is, well, one day reminds us of the cost of the following day, right? That we had to pay a heavy price. 319 soldiers, 79 civilians, 6 beautiful hostages among many. The cost is high of that freedom. But this year, and I want you to talk about this more, Alana, but this year, how do we celebrate liberation when 59 of us, of 59 beautiful souls are not free?
We can't celebrate it. A lot of returned hostages and hostage family members have been putting out statements or like holding up signs saying that there is no independence when they are still there. And that's my message. There is no um how can we celebrate anything? How can we talk about independence when we know there are people who are held in chains in tunnels under Gaza? It's not possible. So I would ask that you don't celebrate and that instead you do something to raise awareness about the hostages and to place pressure on the government to make a deal to end the war and bring them home.
Thank you. It's hard to know how to deal with this. It's hard to know how to feel about this whiplash of these 2 days. But like you say, it's like, I think this is the second year in a row where both days are sad, where both days are tragic and painful. And we cannot yell louder. I think it's not about, me or the two of you yelling louder. We have been yelling.
Yeah.
We need other voices to join this chorus. We need the broad mosaic of Jewish life across the world, right? This isn't going to be just American Jews, though we do have outsized influence. But we need to join the chorus of Israelis who are out there. It used to be every week. That's not even true at this point. They're out there every day. When I was just in Israel, they are camping outside of the Kiryat, outside of the IDF headquarters. I have a friend, one of my childhood friends, who is a social studies teacher, who quit her job last year to basically block Ayalon every night. That's what she does now. And she's sleeping in a tent, and she's there with the families every day. She just turned in her megaphone for a drum because her voice couldn't do it anymore. But it's time for us, the collective global Jewish peoplehood, to stand with them and to demand better from our leaders, from our institutions, and the promise we can make for you at ANU. We're not going to follow other slates and tell you that if you vote for us, we will release the hostages and bring them home, because we cannot. What we can is use the platform that you give us to demand the Israeli government do everything in its power to bring them home. And I'm going to make a moment and ask if there's anything else you want to add for this week's or for today's episode, since we're releasing an episode every day this week, in our concerted.
Our final week before the election.
Vote for us.
Yeah, Zionistelection.org.
You're like really nice about it. Vote for us. I am telling you to vote for us.
Zionistelection.org, right? Vote number 6.
Vote number 6.
Shoshanna?
We'll make it there.
Just that I will be keeping the hostages in mind, and also the hundreds of soldiers who are not much older than my own sons who have died in the last year. It is heartbreaking. It's a generation of young Jews, and to be seeing a war go on for this long, Israel has never seen it. And I think for Americans, it's a little bit harder to understand because our country has been at war like every year, but the war is always over there. So for us, right, we've always been involved in some conflict for the last 40 years, I think, until very, very recently when we pulled out of Afghanistan officially. But this is not normal for a country to be at war for 571 days.
And to your point, one of our slate members, Tori, is currently in Israel, and she was down in Be'eri a few days ago, when Hamas attacked and killed several IDF soldiers, and she heard it. I called her the next day, and she was like, my ears are still ringing, because people forget just how close these communities were to Gaza. And here it was 565 days. But people cannot rebuild their lives while you can still hear explosions echoing in the air. What kind of how I can't even imagine the post-trauma treatment when you are still in present trauma, right? Like, how do we rehabilitate? How do we heal?
But my cousin's therapist has told her there is no PTSD because she's still living the trauma.
Right.
So
Right,
there's no like treating the PTSD. There's only treating the only helping her cope
right.
currently.
The ongoing trauma,
The
because
ongoing trauma that's every single waking moment is trauma.
this is a national trauma that will not end
Yeah.
until
So speaking of
all
that, maybe on your next episode, you should talk about how we can try and influence money that will help heal the people. One of my friends, Noam Schuster Eliassi, who's a comedian and an incredible activist, she says, "From the river to the sea, we all need therapy." And it's funny. It's really funny, but it's true because we are going to see this war have a ripple effect on Israeli society for generations to come. Soldiers who will come back with PTSD, women will be hurt because of the effects of the PTSD on our men. There is so much care. We need community care. We need to take care of Israelis so that they can heal and we can, our nation can move forward. And find peace. And we need to do that with therapy. So that's something I will advocate for.
I've I've been talking about this since 2014
Yeah.
because in that war, it became really apparent to me. I mean, it's a longer story, but like when I finally came back to the US a year after that war, I was at a baseball stadium and an air raid siren went off, and I like
Yeah.
realized I had PTSD a year later,
Yeah.
and realized how many Israelis. And actually, we'll make this recommendation. There's an incredible podcast called PTSD Nation, because there is an Australian who made Aliyah, this is his like lifelong passion now, is getting Israelis more mental health support, because it's an entire nation in both ongoing and like, right, it's like ongoing trauma from October 7th, but also PTSD from
Previous.
generations of war. And I'll tie back to where we started. My family, I think my mom went today to go visit Tuli's family, right? He was killed. He didn't die. He was killed 43 years ago. And yet people still go visit his parents every year to comfort them. And people still cry. And it is still difficult because this was an incredible young man whose life was cut short. And there are so many of them, 30,649 to be exact. 30,649. The diameter of that bomb reaches very, very far in Israeli society, and we cannot heal from this ongoing trauma until the 59 families are reunited with their loved ones. I was hoping we would end on something more positive, but I think that on today, this
Somber.
is just where we end, right? So I want to thank you, Shoshana. I want to thank you, Alana, for joining us, for giving us of your time.
Thank you.
We're with you today, and we're with you every day. So we're here when you need us. Thank you. And like, subscribe, share, review. I don't know. I'm still very new to
All
this
of the above.
podcast hosting. Tell your friends. Most importantly,
Thank you
ZionistElection.org.
for
Vote
this.
number 6. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.